Hi everyone, I'm here today with David and we're going to talk about being startup founder CEOs. So hopefully super relevant for anybody who's interested in that startup journey or maybe founding a business or joining a startup. I'll let David intro himself in a sec. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rich. I started a business called movemeon. It's a global platform for people with a consulting background. Used by thousands of startups for hiring and with lots of resources for people who are interested in joining startups. And with that, I'll let David intro himself and we'll start jumping into some questions.
Great, thanks very much. So I'm David Lambert. I'm the co-founder of a company called Laundry Republic. We're a London-based company. We provide a collection and delivery dry cleaning and laundry service via secure lockers from apartment buildings, offices and gyms all over London. We're a team now of about 60 people, growing very quickly at the moment, profitable. We were founded in 2009, so we've got a reasonably long run behind us. We essentially were there to take the pain out of dry cleaning and laundry. So it's designed to be incredibly convenient, high quality, sustainable, and generally a better way of getting your clothes cleaned.
Awesome, thanks, David. And some interesting things we're going to pick up on later there around potentially being profitable. Sounds like you've kind of built the business incrementally. It's quite different to, let's say, the VC journey that others might have been on.
Yes.
What I'd like to kick off though is around skills. So have a lot of people, I did a poll and 62% of people who did that poll dream of being a CEO or a founder. A lot of people ask me, well, what are the skills that underpin that? What do I need to be working on? So if you think about being in your job today as a CEO and founder, what are the skills that you kind of use day in, day out?
Well, I think fundamentally the most important skill you can have as a founder is implementation. Just being able to turn a concept or an idea into a reality, doing so in a structured way with clear objectives, and then working back from those objectives with, a series of what we call gates and dates. So where we need to get to and by when, and understanding that process and putting that in place with a team of people. I think it's very easy when you're running a business, if you don't have that, to sort of drift along without a clear direction of where you need to be, and actually setting those goals and being able to then turn that into a clear implementation plan, for me, is actually in lots of ways more important than anything else. The idea is important, absolutely, but if you can't turn that into an implementable plan, then you're screwed, really. You've got to have that in place.
Yeah, stuff that gets done well on time, and often it can be something that consultants struggle with in my experience of having been removed from implementing the solution.
100%.
Really
100%.
Doers.
Yeah, I think that was a real gap actually in my skills when we started the business. Consultancy was great, taught me lots of things, lots of skills that I don't think you would necessarily get elsewhere. But there wasn't a huge amount of implementation. Right? It tended to be, you do a project for a client, there's a presentation at the end of that, and then you hand it over to them for implementation. It depends on the work you're doing. Occasionally, I worked for OC&C, so we would mainly be strategy consulting. Occasionally, we would do implementation work as well. And so you see some of that there. But by and large, most of my experience was on the strategy side. So it tended to be answer a particular strategic question for a client, provide them with that answer, and then it was over to them to actually do something with that. And so I didn't have a lot of implementation experience, and that was quite hard. I think when I set up my own business, I think learning how to do that, learning the kind of discipline of it, is something that even now I'm still sort of trying to get better at. I think that consulting was great in lots of ways. It taught me some really strong data analysis skills, and actually I think that's something that you shouldn't. I think it's hard to overestimate just how useful those skills are, being able to take a data set and manipulate that and answer a complex question. There aren't actually many people that can do that. That's something that I think consultants are really good at, and you don't get it in many other roles. You get it in a few, but you don't get it in many, and being able to do that has been tremendously useful, answering a range of different questions, operational questions, marketing questions, being able to kind of cope with a large data set and to handle that and to get it to answer the questions you needed to answer is really useful. So there are lots of skills that I've learned in consulting that have been very helpful in kind of on my journey. But I think implementation probably is the number one thing that I've had to learn to do after consulting that's really crucial in growing a business.
And what's been the most difficult thing about growing your business?
Wow. I think
you can pick one.
Yeah. I think if, before I'd started, I wish I had known a bit more about fundraising and I think a bit more about, you kind of alluded to it at the beginning. We've grown the business, I think, more slowly, but without huge amounts of external investment. We raised a couple of angel rounds, but it was always relatively small sums. And I think we were too slow to raise money at the beginning. And one of the things I've realized is that although fundraising is time consuming, trying to grow a business when you are underfunded is actually more time consuming, because if you don't have the cash available to put into action the plans that you have, that can often be quite a big break on your growth in the longer term. So for me, the hardest thing I think was learning that lesson, learning that although I don't think you necessarily want to just take millions that are being thrown in your direction if you don't have a clear use for that money. And there's nothing wrong with bootstrapping for a bit. There is a point, I think, at which you need, if you're confident, you really need to go out there and raise money from outside parties and use that money to then grow your business very, very quickly.
So being very clear, I guess, about the right implementation plan, and then being maybe honest about what cash it's going to take to do that. Would you have brought forward, if you think about your plan and you talked about dates and gates, do you think you would have brought some stuff forward and said, let's do that quicker, but to do that, let's go raise some money?
Yeah, definitely. I think at the start of the business, we were too slow to hire a bigger team around us. And as a result, I think, we were limited in terms of bandwidth, and we were unable to grow quite as quickly. And in some cases, either we were the block directly, me and my co-founder, or, just having other people in the business to run some of these areas, became a block. I think in hindsight, we would have brought those people in sooner, and to do that, we would have needed to raise money sooner.
Yeah, it's interesting. A couple of mistakes I've seen made by myself, among others, around hiring is hiring too cheaply. I think hiring experts sooner and building a team where everybody you look at is better in their domain than you are, it takes more money, but I think it avoids having to do that at a later stage anyway. So that's something I might add. And the other thing is, it's very easy when you think of a basic salary to think in terms of the annual figure. So most people think, right, okay, that's going to cost me £60,000, and you think of that number rather than the cash flow number, which is probably a weekly or a monthly payroll. And it sounds moronic, and maybe I'm a moron, but I do think that annual number, which can be quite big, is very forefront in people's minds, and it can hold you back from hiring.
Yeah.
If that person is adding value along the way, then the cash flow is going to build, and etc. Did you have those two mistakes maybe under your belt as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think particularly with sales teams, if you've got a decent product and you've got a good sales team, and the kind of annual figure, as you say, can be quite expensive, but month by month it's not. And assuming they hit the ground running and they're able to do their job well, then you would hope that they would be generating positive value for you pretty quickly. And so actually, as you say, although there's always an onboarding process and a training process, and it takes a bit of time for people to kind of get their feet under the table, yeah, they absolutely should be adding value. And if they're not, then you've got to question them whether you've hired the right person, whether it's the right role. So getting that right, it takes a bit of time.
And what are the best bits of your job right now? We've talked a lot about what's difficult and the mistakes made. What do you love about it?
I love the autonomy. I like being able to make decisions without having to run through layers and layers of management, which is not to say I think that I'm the one making the decisions on my own, but I like the fact that my team supports that. And then, if we're happy that we've really dived into an issue, then we can make a decision on that relatively quickly. And that's really important in a range of areas, whether it's strategy, whether it's operations, whether it's hiring people. Just being able to hire people, make quick decisions is so valuable. I also really like, I think, being able to operate somewhere where there's no politics, or at least as I perceive it, not much politics. Maybe other people would say differently, but as far as I can see, we're pretty good as a business at pulling in the same direction, not having agendas. There's always going to be a bit of that, but actually, we've made a real effort to bring in a team of people who work well as a team, get on with each other, and aren't prone to the kind of politics that you sometimes get in larger organizations, which can really suck all the energy out of your work environment.
And I guess in terms of people, then it suits. You've mentioned a few things, kind of doers, implementers, people who are keen to crack on and maybe avoid the politics. Anything else that comes to mind if I'm sat there going, should I be a founder? Should I start a business? Who does it really suit?
So I think one of the challenges when you start a business is there's a lack of structure and processes. I mean, really, like you go from, an environment where you've got an IT department, you've got an HR department, you've got PAs, a lot of the stuff is actually being done for you, even if you don't really necessarily see it. To suddenly you're moving into an environment where you're responsible, and you're dealing with all this stuff at the same time as trying to build a commercial proposition, trying to scale an operation, and you're doing that, and you're also having to set your own objectives and not have someone else do that. And I think if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, you really need to have that drive and that urgency to do those things, and to hold yourself to account if you're not doing those things. So I think you have to be someone that's honest with themselves. You have to recognize that it's quite unglamorous at times. You will have to wear multiple hats within the organization, particularly in the early days. But I would say that if you're energetic, and you do have to have a lot of energy to do this, if you're good at working in teams, and you're able to move quickly between detail, but also the high level view. And I think that's particularly important. You are going to, particularly in the early stages, you're going to split your time between really diving in to an issue and making sure you understand it, and then have to be able to kind of zoom out and work out the kind of high level questions within a business. If you can do those things, then you're well suited to this.
Yeah, and I would echo the people who are happy to do some grunt work. I don't care how much money you go to raise, or how big your team becomes, or how much support you build in those very early stages. There's a lot of knocking on doors. There's a lot of doing, frankly, stuff that somebody else used to do for you, even if it's quite junior in your maybe your larger organization.
Yeah, there's a depressingly large amount of unjamming printers in my experience.
Yeah. I still take the bins out in our office. I always say to people, you need to be someone who actually gets energy from that. Sitting down for 5 hours, smashing through some pretty mundane stuff. In the early stages, there's a lot of that to sort of get done. And anything you wish you'd known before you started, beyond that, maybe the raising money faster, or anything else?
I think managing people outside of consulting is harder. Junior consultants tend to be very bright and highly motivated, and they don't need a huge amount of managing. You sort of set them a task, and then they'll come back, and usually they've completed the task pretty well, and quite often they've done 2 other things you didn't ask them to do as well. And in the outside world, that is not always the case. And people often require either closer supervision or much more direct feedback, and won't have always done what you've asked them to do. And I think that was initially a bit of a shock. I remember we hired very early on in the business, we started hiring delivery drivers, and we were quite green, and I decided that it would be a good idea, after 6 months, to put them through like a 360 appraisal process. And so I asked them to rate themselves out of 5 on a few different areas, and they came back and they just written 5 down.
They did get a lot of 5s.
Yeah. And I said, well, do you think you are a 5 in all of these areas? And he said, well, if I didn't think I was, I wouldn't be doing the job. And it kind of, I think that was a bit of an awakening for me, to be honest. I remember thinking, yeah, okay, fair enough. I guess I hadn't really thought that through. Maybe we need a slightly different process for managing team members. It was kind of funny looking back on it, but we were pretty green. And I think just learning how to manage people who, don't come from exactly the same background, don't have that kind of go-get attitude that you get with consultants. That was a real shock.
Yeah, consulting, when you're outside consulting, you kind of realize what a strange environment it is.
Yeah.
I'd also add, consultants are generally quite good at either finding the help they need. It's amazing how many times I've said to people, have you Googled it? Typically need to say that to a consultant, or just asking for help. So consulting is one of those environments that's very much about peer group support and sort of mentorship support. So you tend to very openly just say, I've got no idea how to do this, and ask for help. And I kind of assume that was the default, whereas, there's a lot of people who will struggle to ask for help. Either they feel like they should be able to do it, or they don't want to bother you, or they don't want to take too much of your time. So yeah, I'd really agree with, needing to learn to adapt your management style and maybe your management processes for, all sorts of different people out there. So we talked a little bit about kind of, moving from consulting to outside consulting. What's the biggest shock do you think people need to prepare for?
Well, you're probably going to get paid quite a lot less, and genuinely that is something that you should consider. I think again, this is probably more relevant, I guess, if you're starting your own business than if you're moving into, say, a corporate role. But I'd certainly had a period where I'd gone from being quite well paid to being really badly paid, and making sure that you've got the kind of savings to cover that is really important, because otherwise it can become a distraction quite quickly. More generally, like I said, I think there are definitely some things that I miss about consulting. You do have this really strong team of people around you who are very like-minded, and whose brains often work in the same way as my brain. So it was always very kind of, people just got stuff really, really fast in consulting. And outside of consulting, you have to spend a lot more of your time explaining that to people, communicating that in language that people can understand, making sure that the expectations you're setting are reasonable for the person who's doing that task. I think in consulting it was basically, you set somebody a challenge more or less as difficult as you could think of, and they would usually come back and they'd done it pretty successfully. Outside of that, I think people can often really, really struggle, and so you have to make sure that you are tailoring what you're asking people to do to their skills. And if you're, and if they can't do that, then you kind of what you said, you're kind of actively getting involved to make sure that they can, and you can help them if they're struggling with that, rather than expecting them to let you know that they're having difficulty.
And what don't you miss? I know it's been a while since you've been a consultant, but some of the scars must still
yeah
strong.
I don't miss the all-nighters, and I don't miss some of the clients. Some, lots of the clients were great, but there were a few where they were quite challenging. So I didn't miss that.
I mean, people aren't ringing you up in the middle of the night about the condition of their dry cleaning.
No, not anymore.
Ring a team member up.
Yeah, exactly.
And last question, this has been super helpful. I'm wondering if you've got any kind of resources you'd recommend as you've kind of been on your founder journey. Is there any stuff you kind of read or listen to or would want others to access and learn from?
Yes, it's possibly not the most helpful of answers, but genuinely the resource that I rely on the most is other entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
I find it hugely beneficial to be able to, whether it's in a kind of formal context, to discuss a problem with them. I'll pick up a phone and call somebody and ask them, how they're hiring an operations manager or what salary they're paying that person. Or even, more informally over drinks. When entrepreneurs get together, it tends to be a kind of therapy session when they will sort of sit there, not necessarily complaining about their problems, but perhaps sharing the challenges that they've had to deal with. And what's really striking about it is often the same challenges that you're facing are the ones that they're facing as well. And it can be slightly lonely at times, starting a business. And so having a sort of support network of people around you who can provide you with information, with ideas, with contacts, but can also provide you with, I think, just the realization that you're not the only person facing these challenges is just, I don't know what I'd do without that. It's really brilliant.
I think that's a great recommendation. And I might add that in my experience, entrepreneurs tend to be quite friendly people, and they tend to welcome people starting businesses. So, if you're sat there thinking, I don't have a network of entrepreneurs, it's amazing how that might get built if you reach out to a few people that you kind of look up to or have come across. The other thing I might touch on is you mentioned that you had started the business with a co-founder. Any thoughts around that and the pros and cons of working with a co-founder or going totally solo?
Yeah, I think a co-founder is very helpful in terms of having somebody that you can bounce ideas off, share problems with, and split activities between. I think that the important thing, though, I think, is that the co-founders have a clear differentiation in the skills that they bring. I think the problem can sometimes come when the co-founders are too similar and there's no obvious commercial director and, say, operations director. So when you don't have somebody who's a marketing genius and somebody who's a sort of an implementation genius, where you can very clearly split the kind of those areas of the business between them, I think it's quite easy to end up stepping on each other's toes. And so having somebody who has a complementary skill set, as long as you trust each other and you kind of agree on the kind of the big things, that's the dream scenario, because then you've got somebody who you can kind of share the responsibility with. You can collaborate on some of the big stuff, but actually on a day-to-day basis, you're trusting them to go out and run their side of the business, and they're trusting you to go out and run your side of the business. And between the two of you, you kind of cover, all three of you in some cases, you cover all of the bases and are able to drive the business forward. I think that's really important.
Great tip. So David, I'm going to bring it to a close there. Just want to say thanks so much. As I guess another business that's grown kind of incrementally and profitably, it's always great to chat to someone who's taken that path, even if on reflection we might have taken different paths.
My pleasure.
If people want to check out Laundry Republic in London, sounds like
yeah, absolutely, go to laundryrepublic.com and yeah, come and see us.
Have a look at what you're doing, and equally, if you're a current or former consultant, go and check out movemeon.com for lots of other resources like this, but also opportunities in startups and beyond that might be of interest to you. Thanks very much, David.
Thank you. Enjoyed that.
And me. Bye.
Take care.